So we're in the kind of the middle of this message series called Model Church. We've been looking at Paul's first letter to the Thessalonian church there in Thessalonica, and looking at them because they're more of a model church than some of the others that Paul wrote to. A lot of the churches that Paul wrote to had issues and they were struggling with different things, and he basically chastising them. But with the church in Thessalonica, man, he was like singing their praises. This was a great church to be a part of. And so I thought, model church, we ought to pattern ourselves the way after how they are. So that's what we've been looking at. We're going to be in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 this morning, toward the end of that chapter. But before we get to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, I want to go way back to the beginning of time. All the way back to the book of Genesis chapter 1. Most of us know what happened, and God bless you, what happened in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, God created the heavens and the earth, and he puts all this stuff together. He creates the sun, moon, and stars, and he looks at it and says, it's good. He creates all the vegetation, all the plants we know, all the trees, and he looks at it and it's good. He creates the animals, the birds of the sky, the fish of the sea, and he looks at it and he says, man, this is good. He creates man. And on the last day, he creates man. He looks over all creation. And this time, he looks at it and he says, this is very good. It's very good. But just one chapter later, not much time passes, I don't think. In Genesis chapter 2, God is looking at Adam. And God's kind of, I think he's like scratching his head. Something's not right here. This isn't good. He says, it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for man to be alone. Do you agree with that? Loneliness is kind of a major disease in America today, I think, and many of us, we want to be with people. We want to have deep community with people. And from the beginning of time, I believe God has created us for community. So when God said it's not good for man to be alone, what's he do? He creates a woman out of the man's rib, and a woman comes on the scene as a helper or a companion for the man. It's a beautiful thing. So from the beginning of time, God created us to be together, to be in community, to want to belong to other people. And over in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, we see God has gathered a church in the city of Thessalonica, a church that wants to be together, that is committed to this community of believers. And not only that, Paul and Silas and Timothy are committed to this church as well. And I imagine in this church in Thessalonica, I imagine the people in there, just like the church today, came from all kinds of different walks of life. There were doctors and lawyers, and I'm sure there were stay-at-home moms, there were retirees, there were probably skilled trades workers, people going to school, just all kinds of different people going to this church. They were young and old. There were probably, what's the word I'm looking for? Rich and poor, and everything in between. And so all of these people came from different kinds of walks of life, just like here today. And even though they came from different walks of life, they all had one thing in common, and that was Jesus Christ. And in that, they commit to one another to being there for each other in this community called the church. And that's what united them, is Jesus Christ. And what we're going to see in this chapter, in the very end of this chapter, is that they were committed to one another. And I want to give you 3 areas of community that we find here in the last section of 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, and if you're taking notes, here's the first one I want to give you. Deep community is based on sincere commitment to one another. Sincere commitment to one another. I would ask us this morning, are we committed to one another here at Hilliard Church of Christ? Are we really committed to one another in Christ's church? What I find to be increasingly true is many of us want to have community in relationship. We want to be a part of something, maybe sometimes bigger than ourselves. We have this innate desire to belong. We long to have friends who accept us and love us for who we are. And we want to have that kind of relationship. And the key to having deep relationships, to having deep community with other people, is this sincere commitment to the relationship. And that makes sense. If you're married, you know when you're committed in that relationship, the marriage goes well. I've seen marriages, they start to fall apart because, well, they're not as committed as they used to be. They're not sincerely committed. And so you know that. Now, here in America, gamophobia, I love that word, gamophobia, and that's just the fear of commitment to relationships, is on the rise. People are more prone to stay out of relationships because they're just afraid of being committed to it. And it's on the rise for many different reasons. Genetics, there's something in our DNA that says, I'm not getting committed. It could be the way you were raised, your upbringing, your family history, just something in that. You're like, I don't want to commit to relationships. You might fear being abandoned in a relationship. You might fear commitment because you fear being hurt by the other person. You don't want to get too deep. I don't want to get hurt. Or maybe you were hurt before in a relationship and you're not going to commit to a new relationship because of how much pain you've experienced in that relationship. And so maybe for a lot of us, we're afraid to get too attached or too committed or too close in a relationship, and we just kind of stay at surface level. I can appreciate that. Been there, been burned in a relationship a long time ago, got burned in a relationship, and it's hard, even now, to really dive deep into relationships because of that. I get the fear. If that's you, I understand it. So we're caught up, though, in this dichotomy of wanting to have a deep relationship with other people versus I really don't want to get too close. And that's tough. That is really hard. And so maybe this is why a lot of people feel alone today. There's this overwhelming sense of loneliness today because, we're good at making connections with other people, but maybe we're not so good at making the sincere commitment to those connections to grow in those relationships. Does that make sense? I'll put it this way. It's easier, I think in my mind, it's easier to friend someone on Facebook or follow someone on Instagram than it is to really delve into a deep personal relationship, to dive deep with someone personally. I can go and hit the like button on your page and, I've got a friend, It's easier that way, but that's not going to work. That in the long term, that doesn't work. We need to have deep relationships. The depth of community that you experience in life is directly connected to the depth of commitment that you have toward others. Are you deeply connected in your commitment to them? You can't have deep community without sincere commitment to those relationships. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, here's what we see. We see this sincere commitment to relationship. Paul writes in verse 17, "But as for us, brothers and sisters, after we were forced to leave you for a short time." Now let's stop there for a second, because very quickly in Acts chapter 17, Paul and Silas, they go to Thessalonica, and for the very first time, they plant a church there. This church, the Thessalonian church that he's writing to. So they plant this church, but the Jewish people in that community, they get upset, maybe jealous, and they start threatening lives, in particular Paul and Silas. And so the church that's been planted, they had only been there 3, maybe 4 weeks. They've got a strong church going in that time period, but the church comes to Paul and Silas and says, "You got to get out of here. Your lives are in danger. We're going to send you out, and you go to another city and you start evangelizing there." And that's what they do. The church sends them out. Their time got cut short in Thessalonica. And so this is what Paul's talking about here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. After we're forced to leave you for a short time, all right, he's talking about the Acts 17 deal. He says, "We greatly desired and made every effort to return and see you face to face." So here's Paul. He's expressing his strong desire to see the church. He's letting them know, I love you guys. I'm committed to you guys. I want to see you guys go stronger in your faith. And so I want to be there for you. He's expressing that desire, and this is one of the features of the church that makes my heart happy. I love to see relationships grow and build within the church, and couples hanging out with other couples and going and doing things together, studying the Bible together, attending worship services together, sitting together in a front row. Like, I think this is great, but sitting together in community, I see that in the church, and I go, man, that is just wonderful. And that's what Paul's getting after here. I want to be with you. Now, here's a formula I want you to write in your notes. Very simply, connection plus commitment equals community. Connection plus commitment equals community. And it's so true. I can't have one without the other. Most of us, if not all of us, we want to have connection with other people. We want to connect with other people. It's why we friend and follow people on social media. It's why we go to sporting events and join civic organizations. It's why we invite people into our home and try to make friends. It's why maybe some of you are here this morning. You want to have a connection with somebody. So connections are important. We have this desire to connect with other people, but it takes sincere commitment to those connections to build that relationship into a deeper type of community. Okay, so here in the church, we ought not to approach deep community with a social media mentality. You know what I mean? Like, we can't approach church from a press the like button frame of mind. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I saw you come into church, like. Oh, you took communion this morning, like. Oh, you got your Bible open this morning? Like. We can't do that. Like, we got to get deeper in our relationships. It takes sincere commitment to dive deeper into relationships to build each other up, okay? So it's connection plus commitment builds community. So let's get committed to those connections, all right?